Okay, sure. My name is Radek Wyrzykowski. I'm a founder of the IMC Club, and the IMC Club was started a long time ago, and I did it for some actually selfish personal reasons.
Welcome to the IMC Club meeting. Safety and proficiency through education and experience. Today's club meeting, going up or down?
I like to call it a mental gym. This is a gym for your brain.
My name is Barry Krupowitz.
I'm Robin. I'm a private pilot at Palomar.
Scott Fischel.
I have about 1,500 hours, 1,600 hours.
I have a little over 300 hours, a private pilot, and I'm wrapping up my instrument rating now.
Problems happen up in the air. You know, there's no way of getting around it, and they never seem to come when you're ready for them.
Tonight I'm at the IMC Club meeting because I want to learn. You never stop learning as a private pilot. I do have an instrument rating. I haven't used it in a long time.
My reason for coming to the IMC Club meeting is to learn from the experience of other pilots and maybe real-world experiences that they've had or things that they know about that can help me prepare for actual IMC conditions.
Immediately, I kissed the ground and I went home to change my underwear, and the idea of IMC Club was born.
So, hangar flying. What do you think of it? I'm kind of mixed myself. On one hand, it's a lot of fun to just shoot the breeze about stuff you may or maybe may not have done, but let's face it, it's oftentimes just a bunch of poorly told stories with a loose plot that ultimately culminates in one of those endings about, how it used to be, or worse yet, a really lucky twist of fate that probably should have ended worse but didn't. And now we have this gem of a story circulating around that makes you wonder how the storyteller is still employed, or alive. But don't get me wrong, I'm the first person who loves a good story, aviation or not, obviously. But I feel like they should go somewhere, and maybe even help someone, or at least not make our airspace system a sketchy place to be, right? I'm Brandon Gonzalez, this is Podcasting on a Plane. This is your aviation audio magazine. It's where we hit aviation from as many angles as possible, and my favorite two angles, of course, are from the cockpit and from the tower, and that's because I'm an air traffic tower controller, and a pilot and a CFI too, and you know the rest. And our stories take place in a mythical but actually quite real place, often referred to as the West Coast Delta. And here in the Delta, we share stories, news, and experiences that'll help you love aviation even more, maybe even make you better. Or, to steal the tagline of today's topic, smarter, safer, and ready for anything. Don't go away.
So he did have the option to go up or down when he was at 11. He chose to go down, right?
Right.
But now there's no nicing above, so actually it becomes potentially a
Hold
regular.
that thought for a second. So, does anybody disagree with his choice to go from 11 to 9?
So this is what I'm talking about. Hangar flying? I don't know, maybe, but I think this is a level or two higher. It isn't really a seminar, not really a lecture, but there's a lot of knowledge changing hands, that's for sure. And I even got to dish some of it out, too. Maybe hangar flying is fun. Anyway, this is a meeting, and it's not a secret one. Quite the opposite, actually, because me and the guy talking, his name's Joe, and another guy named Radek, and actually the EAA, well, we all want you to join the club, too. Because we believe that proficiency is important. Wait, don't turn off the podcast yet. I'm not going to get boring and preachy, I promise. Hear me out. Sometimes I think there's a bit of a flaw built into the flight training system. Really, like for all the amazing CFIs out there, for all the well-planned syllabuses, syllabi, whatever, when you're done with whatever training or rating course you're doing,
Certificate, whether it's private, instrument, whatever it may be, does not prepare pilot for the real life.
Yeah, that's it. It isn't really real. Reality is just different. So how do we bridge that gap? Where can we go to see some shiz get real for someone and talk about it in a manner that will actually give me something to take home? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the answer is called the IMC Club. And don't worry, there's a VMC Club too. So here's the deal. The website says the IMC Club's purpose is to promote instrument flying proficiency and safety. The intent is to create a community of pilots willing to share information, provide recognition, foster communications, promote safety, and build proficiency in instrument flying. IMC Club chapters offer monthly meetings in which pilots can network and share knowledge and experiences. The chapter resources and scenarios are being produced and distributed as a new program by EAA IMC LLC, an Experimental Aircraft Association Inc. subsidiary under a license from the IMC Club International. This will provide resources for new and improved program offerings that will enhance and expand the impact of the IMC concept. To provide continuity, support, direction, and programming, Radek is now the manager of flight proficiency with EAA IMC. Being part of the EAA family will provide the network, critical mass, and resources to take flight safety and proficiency to the next level. EAA IMC Club is presented by Bose Corporation and supported by Jeppesen. So, if nothing else, on this podcast, I want to give you the real deal on what's up with anything. And hopefully by now you come to know, believe, and trust that anything that gets said on here at least passes my own personal gut feel test, and that everything I do is as organic as possible. I mean, let's face it, the show's 100% listener supported, so I can guarantee you no agenda at least. And besides the fun music, I'm hoping that's a central reason you listen to this show in a saturated airspace of others. So, I gotta say, being an inaugural member of a new chapter of IMC is pretty cool, because I think it too is about as organically grown as it gets. Grass-fed, full of minerals, and no corporate pesticides in sight. I'm sorry, I won't do that again. Usually, I'm the one that somebody would hire to get the real goods. No, really, believe me, like, here's a customer testimonial.
And you know the regs, and you know sort of, what has to get done, and then maybe here's how to do it really. And
So my biggest goal is and always has been to give you the real scoop. And when I fly with clients, they're often surprised at the clarity they find, because my favorite lesson to give is to stop looking for the quote unquote recipe. A lot of people, sometimes surprisingly far into their time of aircraft ownership or flying, are really surprised to find out that there isn't really a set it and forget it method for each task. Case in point, I'll never forget the look on a very respected surgeon's face when he finally made a really good landing sitting next to me, because he, well, these are his words, quote, was always looking for that exact power and trim and flap and elevator setting that would result in a great touchdown, so that I could do it every time and then just replicate the results, end quote. But that look was when he realized that it's never the same. Like, you're constantly making tiny adjustments until the airplane is stopped, really. And that's the reality. Constant adjustment and adaptation to whatever's going on all the time. And before this turns into a rant, the point is just that IMC and VMC clubs, or our chapter at least, provides a place where that reality can finally come out. And for that, I'm a huge fan. Which brings us back to the meeting and the question of the night. What would you
the thing
do?
they're dangling out there is embedded cells, and that brings up, I don't know the Avidyne, this particular model of Avidyne. I assume he's got.
So this scenario actually happened to someone, and they shared it, and a whole presentation was made about it and distributed nationwide for the sake of discussion and learning about reality. But who came up with this whole thing, and when, and most importantly, why? Because it can affect just about every single pilot out there, at any level. Well, here's your answer.
Okay, so, it goes way back over 2 decades ago, and way before actually IMC Club was formed. And I do have a, actually presentation that I do on this, how it all started. But it was the day after I got my instrument rating, and I was working on my commercial certificate, and I was doing one of those long VFR cross-country flights, and on the way back, the way it usually happens, you get your weather briefing, and, you expect great weather, and things do change. I got weathered out. I had to divert to another airport. Weather got really low. I stayed overnight. I woke up next morning, and I'm thinking, and I'm an instrument-rated pilot. Got my rating day before, so I should be able to do that. And funny thing, because I felt almost obligated to bring airplane back to my home base, I felt that people are going to laugh at me that I didn't fly when I was instrument rated and it was IMC. So I did that flight. To be honest with you, things went different than what I expected. Literally, I'm not going to be telling you the whole story here because that would take us probably 3 hours. But on the way out from that airport, as I was climbing, I supposed to get my clearance in hold at one of the VORs there. It's called Keene, New Hampshire. And when I was calling ATC, they said, we got your clearance. That was on the way up there. I was hand flying, of course, no GPS. That was last century flying, no GPS, no autopilot. And when they came back and they said, we got your clearance, are you ready to copy? And when I responded, I'm ready to copy, at the time I realized that I have no paper, no pencil, nothing to write with and on. And when sweat started dripping down my forehead, I realized that this instrument certificate does not really prepare me for anything. And it's really the whole flight was a chain of good luck events that nothing bad happened. I went to my destination. It was fairly short flight. I did shoot NDB alpha approach down to minimums. That was the only one available at the time to that airport. And bottom line, as I like to say, once I landed, I got out of the airplane. Immediately, I kissed the ground and I went home to change my underwear, and the idea of IMC Club was born. So many, many years have passed since that time. And I always felt that certificate, whether it's private, instrument, whatever it may be, does not prepare pilot for the real life. It's all about practical knowledge. So in 2010, when I got my, my commercial, my certificate, my CFI, CFWI, MEI, MCFI. I worked as chief flight instructor for one of the large flight schools in Northeast, and was sitting with my friends in a good Greek restaurant there in Norwood, Massachusetts, talking about this, instrument flying business. And I said, how about we form a club, group, support group, that we would go out flying, kind of a challenge ourselves a little bit, come back and sit down and debrief each other on those flights and try to figure out what went different, unusual, unexpected, and how it went. And this way, kind of a learning from each other's experience. And idea took off very quickly. At our first meeting, we had only 6 people. But then, we started gathering more and more and more. And at some point, I said, okay, the idea seems to be working. So why don't we allow other airports to do something similar? And we are going to form an organization and we are going to allow them to do the same thing. And we're going to call them chapters. And to be honest with you, in my wildest dreams, I was thinking about maybe 2, 3 around Boston there. So I typed up a little press release. I sent it out there. I wasn't really expecting much out of it, but somehow it got picked up by AOPA News, I think. And next morning, I come to work and I was overwhelmed. I was getting an email every minute, literally. I was flooded with emails trying to find out, how do they form those chapters? How do they sign up for this organization? So from that point on, it was hard work. We formed formal nonprofit 501c3 organization with board of directors, and we started exploring different models there because, of course, our original model would not be sustainable on a large scale. But bottom line, we started growing very rapidly, and within 5 years, what happened, we had over 120 locations globally and almost 3,000 registered members. And that is when EAA started talking to us. And, after some discussions, we came to a conclusion that, we could utilize a much better infrastructure and much larger audience, and we would be actually beneficial, the program, for EA members and EA chapters. And in 2015, we pretty much merged our nonprofit with EAA's, and our IMC Club became an IMC Club, EAA IMC Club program for EAA members and EAA chapters. And from that point on, it was, still we're continuing our explosion, if you will. Since that time, as we know, now we are in 2020. We're just starting, but we passed way over 400 locations already. And also, what I should be saying here is that along the way, as I was transitioning an IMC club inside the EAA chapter structure, and as I was exploring, calling different EA chapters and talking to them about this program, and I would always get feedback saying, great idea, we love it. But on occasion, they would say, Radek, but there is only one problem here. And I would say, okay, so what is the problem? And they will say, we have no instrument rated pilots. And that is when, another light bulb went on in my head. And I said to myself, how about we utilize this concept that is working? And it's slightly different from, what I told you, it was at the very beginning as we started. And I said, how about we utilize this, but we're going to be simply addressing issues that are not related to instrument flying. And that is how the sister program was born, and we called it VMC Club. So now we have both IMC and VMC Club. So how does it work now? So now what we do is we collect from our members a real life events as they happen when people fly out there. And to be honest with you, we don't want to produce anything artificial. We want real life. That is what IMC and VMC Club is all about. And some of those events, when I present them, as I travel across the country and I have those presentations about the concept, and I usually try to come up with some sample of, what we have. And as I present those, sometimes people say, Radek, you said that, you don't do anything artificial. There is no way this thing really happened. And yes, it did. And that is, what we are utilizing. So what we do, we produce short audio-visual scenarios out of those events. And they are accessible only to our IMC and VMC Club program coordinators. But the whole idea is when the scenario is played during the meeting, at the end, question will come on the screen and will say, what would you do? What would you do in this situation? For decades, unfortunately, what we've been doing is analyzing somebody else's situations. And a lot of times we have a tendency to look at those NTSB reports and reading them and saying, that was crazy, that was stupid, I would have never done it. And yet we go and we do it because that's not the way. The way is to exercise yourself. And that is what we do. So when question comes up on the screen, what would you do? In that particular situation, we want every participant with their own experience to put themselves in that situation and try to figure out what to do. Sometimes somebody, when we do that, we have those presentations and we have this scenario playing on the screen. Question comes up at the end, what would you do? And somebody would say, I would probably go to a different airport, I would contact ATC, all those general statements. And that's not what we want to have, because that is not what you will be doing in an airplane. So when things do happen there, you're not going to think in terms, okay, I'm going to contact ATC or I'm going to, go to a different airport or divert. You need to do something right away. For example, we have one scenario that, potentially in a solid soup, you are losing one or more of your instruments, but you are not sure which one it is. So well, you need to determine what the problem is right away. You are not going to be thinking in general terms. And unfortunately, a lot of those discussions and training programs that are out there, they have two approaches. Either they will discuss things, in those general terms, or they will insist that there are four options and there is only one correct answer, which is not the case in real life, because what is happening when you're out there could be 27 different ways of getting out of particular situation, and they will depend on somebody's experience and a lot of other factors, their capabilities and so on. So that is what we want to do. I like to call it a mental gym. This is a gym for your brain to exercise your aeronautical decision making process. So meetings normally they will consist of two elements. We have something that we call question of the month that is emailed to all program coordinators out there. And a question of the month comes with an answer, with the answer. So you have question and the answer to that question. So the idea is that program coordinator should ask that question at the beginning of the meeting. Then on a group basis, we try to figure out if anybody knows, how to answer that question. We have a little discussion, and then we can disclose the answer to that question. And then scenario that is played, and at the end of the scenario, question comes up on the screen, and what would you do? And that is when we go in this, what I like to call it, an organized hangar talk. Is every meeting going to be the same out there in the country? No, because as long as we preserve the spirit of the program, we are allowing some flexibility. So some program coordinators, they will be coming up with their own materials. They will be inviting speakers. They will be searching online for some good material for discussion. But the idea is that it has to be related to real life, and we are going to be discussing a practical knowledge related to that particular situation. So is there a cost to join? Of course, $100 per month in small bills payable directly to Radek. No, just kidding. There is no cost per se. I mean, of course, this is an EAA founded program. So participants should be EAA members. So if you want to join, you should also join EAA, because that is how we are going to be funding this, through your membership dues. If you're not an EAA member and if you show up at one of those meetings, are we going to throw you out? No, of course not. We want you to see what it is, and of course our hope is that after 1, 2, or maybe 3 meetings, you are going to join our organization. So in that aspect, it's free to all EAA members and to all guest participants. And of course, on a limited basis, because if we have a full meeting full of non-members, then we may have a problem. So the monthly scenarios are produced on a monthly basis. They, with exception, of course, July and August, because those are two adventure activities pre and post for us, and a lot of things happening. And each scenario, it's real. It's based on actual situation that happened to somebody there. I had a friend of mine who called me, day after he was flying, and said, Radek, you will never believe what happened to me when I was flying. And he told me what happened, and I said, I don't believe you. Exactly, but it did happen. For example, in his case, on takeoff in Cherokee, he lost one of his gears, and he didn't know about it. So on the way back to the airport, he gets this transmission on the radio saying, Cherokee inbound, are you the one who left one of your gears on the runway about half an hour ago? And the question is, what would you do? There is no chapter in a book that is going to address it. There is no checklist that you could be using here. You're in a low wing airplane, so you don't know if it's you. And what would you do? So this is a typical scenario that would have something that cannot be addressed and was not addressed in your training. And most likely you're not going to find anywhere anything that is going to tell you that you have 4 options and then you should do C, and that is a correct answer. Because in this case, options are literally unlimited depending on a lot of factors. So how do we get those scenarios? Process is very simple. On our website, which is EAA.org, and there are 2 of them, /VMC Club or /IMC Club. But on either of those 2 pages, when you go there, there is a link that says, tell us your story. And when you click on that link, we're going to guide you through the process. There's an interactive form that will tell you exactly what information we need. There are boxes that you can mark and you can say, I don't want to have my name disclosed. I don't want to have my location disclosed. I still want to keep my certificate. And after we get all that information that is there, I will say we are going to mold it a little bit because, a lot of times we don't want this scenario to be played at some airport and people looking at somebody saying, was it you? So we are going to potentially even move it to a different location. We're potentially going to move to a different airplane depending on the situation. But we are going to produce those, short audio-visual scenarios out of this. And the shortest scenario, I believe it's like 3 minutes video. And the longest is half an hour, but you have to see it to know why it's justified to be that long. So is there any other material there? Yes. It's not only scenarios itself. We have full library of those, and as I said, we are more or less producing 1 new scenario per month. But also we have some other materials available to our program coordinators. Those materials are primarily submitted by our program coordinators out there. If somebody does something on their own, they get creative. They come up with some exercise or some presentation, or they come along a video that generated a good discussion. We ask them to email those to us, to me. And then, we repackage them. And if they want to, we give them credit for it. And they are also placed in that library there. So there are some other materials available for a program coordinator out there besides regular, scenario question of the month format. And the reason for it is that we actually encourage our program coordinators to do something different every 3 months. So every quarter, every 3 meetings, just come up with something different. So there is some change in the format. But, we also ask them not to forget to preserve the spirit and intent of what we're trying to do, which is always a practical knowledge and learning from each other. So how can you start one of those groups? It's important to know that we are not a separate organization. We're a program within EAA. My function there is a manager of flight proficiency. So I'm responsible for all the proficiency programs that EAA is producing and putting out there. We do have a lot besides actually IMC and VMC Club, and I can tell you a little bit more about this later on if we have time. To start one of the groups, the best way is to find an EAA chapter nearby. Talk to them, and if they don't have the program already, if they do, then you just go there and then participate. If they don't have a program, just talk to them and say, I would like to be the one who will be doing it. And most likely they will embrace you. They will say, absolutely, come on board. And what you are going to be gaining in a situation like this is a full support of the TA chapter, access to their membership base. And a lot of times they have their own facilities, their own equipment for presentations, and so on. So once you have that agreement with your local EAA chapter, you contact me at radek@eaa.org. That's RADEK at eaa.org. And I'm going to send you an online application form that you fill out. And the only thing that you will need to have is, besides yourself, you will need to have 4 initial participants, because we would like to have 5 initial participants for anybody to start one of those groups. And one of those participants has to be a CFI. In case of an IMC Club, it would have to be a CFII who is associated with the group. And what I mean by that is that that individual doesn't run meetings. They don't have to teach anything. They are not endorsing anybody. They are just available to whoever is going to be running and conducting those meetings. In case, there is some question that cannot be answered by the group or something questionable, and, they need to have it resolved. So once you submit that online application form with all that information, you will have to go through an 1.5-hour training webinar for our program coordinators. So you know exactly how to utilize those scenarios. You know exactly how to log in, how to play, all the mechanics of the program, but also the whole philosophy and how to conduct a good guided discussion and so on. And then you are there. You have access to the library and you can go and have your meetings. And of course, it's true for both an IMC club and a VMC club. So you may say, okay, so what if there is no EAA chapter nearby? So I looked around and, there are a lot of them, but they were not everywhere. So yes, you can set a standalone group that is without an EAA chapter. It's all in the application process. It's the same things. You still need to have 5 initial participants. You will need to have a CFI, unless you're a CFI yourself, associated with the group. And the application form is the same. It's just a different checkbox that you mark there on the application. And you still have to go through this 1.5-hour training webinar. So the only difference is that you are not going to have this whole, potential infrastructure support of EAA chapter. The third option is start your own EAA chapter. Why would you do that? Absolutely, you would if you want, besides just having an IMC or VMC club meetings. There is a lot more that you can do, and you can re-energize your local pilot community and have a lot of fun, and then full support of the entire organization.
So, what are you going to do? You going to join one? You want to start one? Well, I think the best part of this whole thing is how easy it is to start a chapter. But don't take my word for it. I want you to hear it straight from a newly minted chapter president, my colleague and recent recipient of a proficiency check issued by yours truly, plus a generous supporter of the show, aircraft owner and journalist that you may have heard of. Here's Joe Godfrey.
So I got my instrument rating 20-something years ago, and everybody told me that the hardest thing about it would be staying current, and that's proven to be true. I've fallen out of currency a few times, and I'm current now, but the clock is always ticking. So when I'm either when I'm current or when I'm not current, I find that I'm always gravitating to the magazines and articles and webinars and and live presentations, and just trying to fill my head with instrument flight rules and IMC stuff, and just keep my head in the game. Flying an approach on X-plane is nice, but I really find that talking about the system, flying in the airspace, the challenges we face, that process is a good one for staying current and keeping your head in the game. So, I think the best way to stay fresh is to go out and fly in the system. The second best way is probably to do the approaches on a sim. And then the third best way is to sort of get together with people and talk about it. So when I found out that there was such a thing as an IMC club, I started going to the meetings. In where I live, there's a club that's about 20 miles away from me. And in the middle of that 20 miles is a giant traffic snag. And so it winds up taking an hour to an hour and maybe even an hour and a half to get to that meeting because of when they hold it in the day. So you're fighting rush hour. So I went to that meeting, but it's so frustrating to get there that I thought, gee, I wonder if there's enough people on this side of that traffic snag to put together a group that we could meet up here and not have to go through the frustration of attending that meeting. And I know the guy that runs that meeting, and I asked them, do you think I could start a club in the north part of the county that wouldn't cannibalize your attendance down there? Because I didn't want to hurt those guys to do this. And they said, no, we think that'll be great. So it turns out that I was at Oshkosh last year, and I talked to the people that run the IMC Club, that supervise the program nationally, and figured out what I had to do to start one. So that was like July, August. By September, I was signed up to one of the local CFIIs was giving an IFR refresher, and I went to that. And as I was looking around the room, I thought, well, this is your people. These are the people that are going to want to come to an IMC Club meeting. If anybody does, this is them. So I circulated a petition, or a sign-up sheet rather, and had them fill out names and email addresses, and stayed in touch with that group. And that was how I started sort of forming this thing. Because, the worry was, would I have enough people? I didn't want to have a meeting and have 4 people show up and just have it not be vibrant and informative. So then I got in touch with the EAA people in Oshkosh, and Radek, who you'll hear from elsewhere in this podcast, is great. He's helped lots and lots of people start these groups around the country, and he has like a cookbook. First you do this, then you do that, then you do this, then you do that. And there's a whole system, and he runs you through it, and he's very good at it. And pretty much all your questions are answered. And there's good resources for you. And I would say to people that are thinking, well, why would you go through the auspices of the EAA? Why not just put something on Meetup or, and just, gather together and talk about instrument flying? But the resources you get from the EAA are really good. There are movies and quizzes and so forth. So that's the advantage of going through the EAA. And, the EAA is not, they're not rigid about who can attend the meeting. You don't have to flash a membership card on your way in. Most people are members of the EAA, but, we don't turn anybody away, and we just hope that people will find value in it and support the organization by joining every year. And it's a nominal fee to be in the EAA, and you get a nice magazine and access to all the webinars and so forth. So deciding to start one was not that hard. Finding the group, was just a good timing, or lucky timing, I should say, on my part, to have a group of people to start with. I think if you didn't have an IFR refresher seminar when you wanted to start your group, just get with a couple of the CFIs on your field, and they'll probably know people that are interested in this. The neat thing about IMC is that, we have a couple retired airline captains in this group. We have people that are working on their rating. We have people that are pretty much everyday instrument flyers, occasional instrument flyers, people that are probably really, really sharp on all the regs, and people that aren't. And so that's the nice thing about this group is there's almost always somebody that knows more than you and somebody that knows less than you that you can help. So you can pay it forward by helping the people that need to know the stuff you know, and there are people above you paying it forward so that you can learn from what they know.
So now we've had a few meetings. How do you feel now? Was it a success?
Well, it's off to a good start, is the way I would say it. I don't think we've reached critical mass yet, and we can throw a party yet. But I like where it's headed. I think one of the big surprises to me was I had pretty good communication with my initial group, the people that attended the refresher, and once I found out that these meetings are eligible for wings credit, then I had to figure out how to give it to them, the attendees. And that involved me becoming an FAA safety team rep, which was, no one was more surprised than me that I became an FAA safety team rep. But here I am. And once you publish your meeting on the FAA SPANS, SPANS site, then you determine the radius of people that see it. And I think my FAA advisor and I picked, 75 miles as our radius. And so we're drawing people from Orange County, we're drawing people from Temecula, and those are, maybe half an hour to an hour's drive away. But I sort of get that, because there were meetings I went to in El Centro when I was just starting to learn how to fly. And if the topic was good enough, it didn't take much to get me to get in an airplane and go somewhere. So I understand that people are a little thirsty for this kind of information and would drive an hour to get it. So yeah, I'm liking how we're getting started. I really appreciate you coming to the meetings and offering your perspective on things, because you have a unique perspective of being a pilot in the system, but being a controller, and the regs, and sort of what has to get done, and then maybe here's how to do it really, and so it's great to get that perspective. And if a bunch of pilots just got together without the point of view that you bring, then we wouldn't be as informed. So I appreciate what you're adding to the meeting.
All right, so textbook knowledge is good, and we get we get our certificates. But then, just like myself, doing my first instrument flight the day after my instrument rating, the real life comes in. And in real life, things are different. And it all depends on your own abilities and your own experience. How do we exercise those? How do we practice? I like to say, as a flight instructor, I was always saying to my students, this is your license to learn. And then I realized that for years, I was lying to my students, because it's not a license to learn, it's a license to practice. Because when you are a private pilot, when you're an instrument-rated pilot, you already have your knowledge. So you already learned that part. And of course, there are new things coming up, new equipment. That type of learning is always and should be there. But the practical knowledge is something that we exercise. Imagine trying to explain to somebody how to jump over the bar, let's say athlete or sharpshooter, how to hit your target. Unless you go there and you practice over and over again, you are not going to be proficient. So it's all about proficiency. And proficiency, it's about doing it. It's about exercise. And if we exercise every possible option that is out there, every possible mistake that somebody else made, we don't have to make that mistake again. And that is how we're going to be smarter, safer, and ready for anything.
So what do you think? You want to give it a shot? I recommend you do, and I'm really glad that I did. I want to finish up with a reading from the IMC website, and it was written by Radek himself about why you ultimately want to be involved. It picks up just after Radek's story about his first flight the day after getting his instrument ticket that he told. He says, "Since that first instrument flight, for years I had suffered in silence, systematically and patiently gaining my experience by dipping in clouds whenever I could. In the process, I discovered that I like to challenge myself and be the best I can be for my own satisfaction. Becoming a CFI and eventually a chief flight instructor finally gave me an opportunity to start passing my passion and practical knowledge to other pilots and flight instructors. As much as it's needed and necessary, no government regulation or FAA mandated training will ever make you a safer pilot. Why is it then that we obsess over what's required instead of taking care of what's necessary? We can and should self-regulate our experience, leaving all FAA minimums well below what our own standards should be. When you arrive at your car at a stop sign at an intersection, do you stop because you have to, or to see if there's other cars in your path? What would you do if one day the stop sign was stolen? Would you still stop, or would you keep going, endangering your life because the regulation is missing? Too often after reading an NTSB report about someone who crashed, we rush to judgment. We criticize, trying to blame the pilot for what we call a stupid decision. Most accidents, when they happen, are the final result of a chain of simply wrong decisions. At the point of the accident, which usually takes just a few seconds, they're most of the time irreversible. We all make mistakes, and most of us are likely to be able to recognize and stop them at the onset. Some of us are simply lucky, and the situation resolves itself with a positive outcome. There's no pilot who would wake up in the morning and say, "Today, I want to do something stupid and crash." And yet we still do it. I strongly believe we not only have an obligation, but we have a responsibility to let others learn from our mistakes. And after all, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Some people say that 90% of learning is gained after we graduate from any training or school. So think of this program, EAA or IMC Club, as your opportunity to be able to bring that 90% of practical knowledge to the table. It could be 9,000 hours, 900 hours, or 9/10 of an hour. You'd be surprised how much you can help, and in the process, learn from others. We want you to be a better pilot, not simply tell you that you have to be one. And we want you to enjoy the process. While flying is and can be used for transportation, flying is definitely more fun than just travel. As pilots, we know that our enjoyment is simply being in the air. IMC Club provides organized hangar flying focused on building proficiency in instrument flying. It's the only organization of its kind. In believing that safety and proficiency are developed through experience, our monthly meetings use real-world scenarios to engage our members and allow them to share and build their experience. There's no cost to EAA members to join this movement. Check if there's an IMC Club at your local EAA chapter and get involved. And if there isn't one, ask them for it. Well said, Radek. Well said indeed. To find your local chapter of EAA, IMC, or VMC, go to EAA.org. Podcasting on a Plane is listener supported. To get started, swipe up on your podcast player app to reveal today's show notes, and the website, of course, is podcastingonaplane.com. If you find value in the show, I'd really appreciate having you on board as a patron. Or if you're not into the recurring thing, maybe head over to buymeacoffee.com/bravogolf, spelled out, and do a one-time thing in increments of just $3. And as always, I thank you so much for your support, and for listening to the show, and for passing the word along about this or any of your favorite aviation podcasts. I hope you've enjoyed your time in the Delta today, and until next time, your frequency change is approved, but report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his, and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.